Hello friends and welcome. In this video I'd like to invite you to think with me through Kirsty's song from the end of George MacDonald's novel Heather and Snow. First I'm going to sing you the song to a tune that I set it to, and I'm not entirely sure whether I got this tune from one that I wrote or whether it's an old hymn tune. I know that I set words to this tune many years ago, and what I did here was I added a chorus for the last two lines of each stanza. But I do feel confident that if this is a hymn tune, it's at least 150 years old, so we're not trespassing on anyone's intellectual property. So let's first sing it, and then we'll go through verse by verse. Love is the part, and love is the whole. Love is the robe, and love is the pall. Ruler of heart and brain and soul, love is the Lord and the slave of all. I thank thee, love, that thou lov'st me. I thank thee more that I love thee. Love is the rain, and love is the air. Love is the earth that holdeth fast. Love is the root that is buried there. Love is the open flower at last. I thank thee, love, all round about, that the eyes of my love are looking out. Love is the sun, and love is the sea. Love is the tide that comes and goes. Flowing and flowing it comes to me, ebbing and ebbing to thee it flows. O my sun and my wind and tide, my sea and my shore and all beside. Light, O light, that art by showing, wind, O wind, that liv'st by motion. Thought, O thought, that art by knowing, will that art born in self-devotion. Love is you, though not all of you know it. Ye are not love, yet ye always show it. Faithful Creator, heart longed for Father, home of our heart, enfolded brother. Home to thee all thy glories gather, all are thy love, and there is no other. O love at rest, we loves that roam, home unto thee we are coming home. Love is Home by George MacDonald. Let's begin with the first verse. what I hope to do here is to make connections, a few connections to the novel itself, and perhaps more connections to George MacDonald's thought in other places, especially the unspoken sermons, and perhaps other places as well. And we can, in this time, draw out only a few of the hundreds of connections that could have been made. But hopefully the ones that we can draw out in this time will be good food for thought. Now, I can't really recap the entire story of Heather and Snow, since there isn't really time. But it is perhaps a good thing to start there first. Heather and Snow, I thought, and I read this one in the past few months for a George MacDonald reading group that I participate in, is remarkable for what a strong central character Kirsty is as a woman. And George MacDonald is no stranger to writing strong central woman characters. And he does this especially in his fairy tales, where the wise woman is the goddess, is the character who reveals God. But often in his novels, readers have felt and complained that it's the male character who rescues the weak woman who's in need of rescue, and the male character is the central Christ-like figure. And this is not always true. I think there is a balance in MacDonald's novels between strong Christ-like male character and strong goddess-like female character. But Heather and Snow is certainly remarkable for what a powerful female character Kirsty is. And I can't hope to do that justice here, but she is badass, to put it bluntly. She takes matters in her own hands and gets stuff done. And when this rake is deceiving a weak female character and is going to persuade her to go off with him, Kirsty actually abducts the girl to save her and bring her to her senses. And then she punishes the would-be seducer by beating him up with a horsewhip. And she rejects the marriage proposal that this arrogant son of a laird makes to her multiple times, telling him flat out that he's not worthy of her, and beating him at the beginning of the story in a foot race, and constantly, very bluntly telling him where he falls short in his character. But not only does she reject him over and over again, she rejects him after he tries that classic manipulative male ploy of, well, if you just take me, you could make a better man of me. And she says, no, you are not going to be worth anything until you do what's right, not for my sake and not for my approval, but because it's the right thing to do and because it's your job. And he takes a very long time to learn that lesson. And after multiple rejections from her, when he has no longer any hope of her accepting him, he finally does go and listen to her and do the thing that is in front of him, his duty, and starts to actually gain some strength of character in doing the right thing. And then, without him asking again, at the end of the story, Kirsty, who does love him, comes to him and proposes to him and takes him on, not because of a failure of nerve on her part, because she thinks she needs a man to protect her. She tells him very plainly she doesn't need him. But because she thinks now that it's not going to do him harm by her marrying him, because he's no longer dependent on her in order to do the right thing. It's a remarkable story, and she is portrayed as a goddess, very much intentionally so. MacDonald calls her that. But at the same time, she's down to earth. She keeps her bare feet on the soil of her native Scotland. And while, you could argue that she's a too good to be true character, like you argue maybe about Malcolm or Gibby or Donald Grant, I think she's believable. And she lives to serve her family. She lives to serve her mentally disabled brother, who believes that he's a dog throughout the first part of this story, and yet has this beautiful confidence in the Son of Man to set all things right for him. And she lives to serve him, and I don't want to give too many spoilers to the story. But suffice it to say that when she sings this song at the end of the story, she has a right to sing it. And I think it would be easy to take this song and say, yes, it's very beautiful, but it's just one of those love is everything songs, and it's really beautiful, and there's a lot of images from nature, and of course, love is everything because God is love. And you could say that and miss the incredible thrust of this song. Because I think that it expresses this earth-shattering epiphany of what love is, that until you see it for yourself, it's going to be just words, and they could be beautiful words, but it's going to be just words. And when you do see it for yourself, it suddenly becomes this glorious thread that binds all of reality together. And then it's yours, right? But you can't see it until it becomes yours, until it's your epiphany and not somebody else's epiphany. And I can't say that this has entirely become the case for me, only that I've had a few glimpses that convince me that this is not just sentiment here. This is not just effusiveness about how wonderful love is, and God is love, and everything is love. But this is an expression of something that Kirsty and George MacDonald, through Kirsty, who I think is a very real character for him, is just trying to convey to us, and realizing that they can't really convey to us until we see it for ourselves. But maybe we can get a little bit of a glimpse of it as we go through the poem. So let's try. And let's start with the first verse. Love is the part, and love is the whole. Love is the robe, and love is the pall. Love is the Lord and the slave of all. And so love as king and slave. I think that one of the places that this is most beautifully expressed in, and MacDonald expresses it everywhere in everything that he writes, but it reminds me especially of this passage, which I'm going to put up in front of us, from his sermon, The Child in the Midst. What is the kingdom of Christ? A rule of love, of truth, a rule of service. The king is the chief servant in it. The kings of the earth have dominion. It shall not be so among you. The Son of Man came to minister. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. The great workman is the great king, laboring for his own. So he that would be greatest among them and come nearest to the king himself must be the servant of all. It is like king, like subject in the kingdom of heaven. No rule of force is of one kind over another kind. It is the rule of kind, of nature, of deepest nature, of God. If then to enter into this kingdom we must become children, the spirit of children must be its pervading spirit throughout, from lowly subject to lowliest king. Hence the sign that passes between king and subject. The subject kneels in homage to the kings of the earth. The heavenly king takes his subject in his arms. This is the sign of the kingdom between them. This is the all-pervading relation of the kingdom. And this very much captures the spirit by which Kirsty lives her life. And at the end, she, in this chapter, the coronation, she does just that. She asserts that she is the ruling partner in the relationship, and yet she kneels before him. She crowns him in her service of him, just as she's been serving her brother and everyone else in her life all along. I think these last two lines of this first verse are fascinating. I thank thee, Lord, that thou lovest me. I thank thee more that I love thee. And this is something that I'm not 100% certain in myself is completely right. I think that we can thank him more for his love, which creates ours. But I see where he's going with this. MacDonald says that it's by loving and not by being loved that we come nearest to another person. That's from the end of Fantastes, and it's one of the more famous quotes from MacDonald. That it's our love for others, that it's our greatest treasure, and not others' love for us, no matter how precious that is. And I think there's some truth to that, although I don't think that it's necessary for us to separate it out. I think it's worth thinking about more as we go through this poem. But I don't think that there's no shadow of egotism in this. It's the recognition that our greatest treasure is the love that God has birthed in us through his love, right? It comes from him. It is born of him, but this is the love that is ours, that he birthed in us, that is our possession now. And what a glorious treasure that is. Now, as we go into this second verse, we start this extended sequence of nature metaphors where love is this, love is that. Love is the rain and love is the air. Love is the earth that holdeth fast. Love is the root that is buried there. Love is the open flower at last. I thank thee, love, all round about, that the eyes of my love are looking out. And this image of the flower, which the sun and the air and the rain birth out of the earth, and that therefore, and then opens out into the air as an offering to the heaven, as an offering to the sun, is central to MacDonald's poetry and sermons and thought and stories. And there are many flowers in MacDonald, many specific flowers like the snowdrop, for example, that have a special significance. But I think here of the daisy, which has incredible significance for MacDonald through all his stories, like the lark does, as an example from the animal creation. And MacDonald, when he thinks about daisies and thinks about his native Scotland, he goes back to the etymology and explains it as day's eye, the eye of the day. And there's this beautiful passage in Photogen and Nycteris, the day boy and the night girl, where Nycteris is rhapsodizing on the daisy and learning from the daisy. And she learns to see the daisies as the eyes which come out of the earth and look back at the great sun, the miniature sun that looks back at the great sun. And I think this is how we need to see this whole verse, that it's not just love is everything, but love is our milieu, love is our nourishment that births our being, that birthed us and births love in us, and love is then the flower of our being and our selfhood, which we now have to offer back to him as our treasure. And so now we are love, and now we are the little sun opening to the great sun in the firmament. And so this thanksgiving that is birthed in us is the thanksgiving that our eyes, our day's eyes, are now open. That through the work of the the milieu love and the nurturing love and the life-giving love, we have now been brought to the point where we are conscious and can perceive that love and perceive that love in us. And so this thanksgiving now is for this ability to see, for this ability to behold the Son and to mirror the Son. We are the living mirrors of the light. And these metaphors are continued in the next verse. Love is the sun and love is the sea. Love is the tide that comes and goes. Flowing and flowing it comes to me. Ebbing and ebbing to thee it flows. O my sun and my wind and tide, my sea and my shore and all beside. And I cannot but think of George MacDonald's incandescent, magnificent sermon, Life, from the second series of the Unspoken Sermons, which I think is his greatest sermon perhaps, and it's his Ephesians in his complete theological message, right? Not to say that MacDonald is to take the place of our Christian source documents, but that's kind of the place that has in his theological corpus. And in it he talks about, if ever the sun on the sea and the flashing of the light and the glory has given you this sense of life before, imagine what it is if God himself comes and thinks the gladness of a God in the caves of your inner being. And you have to go and read that. It's too long of a quote. I'd end up quoting the whole sermon if I started to do that. But I think that it's worth reading in context with MacDonald's rhapsody on God's life. And particularly this image, right? Again, it's not just, love is everything and we can sing about it and it's just words. It's sentimental. But no, this is someone trying to express in language this sense that we are caught up in this living pulse, this heartbeat of God, where every beat is sending life from his heart into ours, and then it goes pulsing back to him from us, not merely passively, but with our consent and our glad participation in sending it back to him. And so, yes, it's flowing forth with more force than it comes back from us. It's ebbing back from us to him. And yet we are consciously sending it back to him. We have a part in this heartbeat. And MacDonald sees us as distinct persons from God, derivative persons who have been given being and are not self-existent, but yet have never been separated from God so far that the connection has been severed. We just come back and run back to the great heart to perceive that this channel between our being giver and us is still open if we clear away the debris that has been choking it and willingly let the love flow back to him. Then we come to see that this channel has always existed, and we don't have to frame it. We don't have to laboriously build a union between us and God. It's always been there. And this artery and vein system that carries his love from the great heart and carries it back to him is already there. It's the rule of the greatest nature, our nature, his nature, one nature, even though we are derivative and he is self-existent, and we can send it back to him. then he continues that same metaphor through light and wind, through thought and will. And he starts to think about the preciousness of our human faculties, which I think Thomas Traherne does so beautifully in his Centuries of Meditations. I so wish that MacDonald, and this is a little bit of an aside, I so wish that MacDonald could have read Thomas Traherne's Centuries of Meditations, and that it had been discovered before the beginning of the 20th century, because I think that he would have loved it so much. But I realize that God is over all, and I'm sure that MacDonald and Traherne are having a wonderful time together, and that they are just enchanted with what each one has to offer in terms of thought, and so they're not missing out. But I would love to have had MacDonald's thoughts on Traherne, and I encourage you, if you have not yet, to read Thomas Traherne's Centuries of Meditations. And please don't be put off by Traherne's seeming callousness in places about hell. Traherne's not perfect, and he was still on the way. But if you can get through that, I have a hard time with the second half of the first century and the first half of the second century. But if you can get through that, the first half of the first century and then the third and fourth centuries are just absolutely magnificent and are precisely what MacDonald's talking about the why the spirit of a child is our natural human state, and why we can return to it, and why that state is the simple perception of the glory of the simple great gifts that God gives us unasked. And that's a line stealing from Tagore, but like the sun and the light and the wind, and the water, and if we can learn to prize those things according to their true value, we'd really be filled with all the fullness of God, and we'd really just experience his life. So if we can just start to withdraw ourselves from the tinseled vanities in the great 17th century, the things that the human world constantly tells us that we should be valuing, and start to value the sun and the wind and the grass and the sea and the lakes and I know I'm going to sound foolish here, but we all have access to that. We all can look up at the blue sky, and perhaps we could learn more from that than anything else. And from the lineaments of our own being and the glory of our own ability to think and will. I love these lines. Love is you, though not all of you know it, right? The light and wind don't know that they are offspring and ministers of the essential love. Our thought and will, we can come to know that. But whether it's our human thought and will or whether it's the light and the wind, we're always showing it. We're the evidences of it. And the glorious thing, right, as human beings, we can become conscious, willing, consenting evidences of it, living letters. Now, trying to sing these last two verses, these feminine rhymes kind of diminish the melody a little bit, unfortunately, but I wouldn't part for these last two verses for anything. And especially this last one. Faithful Creator, heart longed for Father, home of our heart enfolded brother, home to thee all thy glories gather, all are thy love, and there is no other. O love at rest, we loves that roam, home unto thee we are coming home. These last two lines we could talk about for hours. I love the connection to a song which occurs in Phantastes and in Lilith, which really deserves its own episode here, that where he talks about room to roam, but only one home, for all the world to win. This idea, obviously it's the title of the song, Love is Home, so we should look to that for the meaning of this whole song. And if we could grasp what he's saying about home and the love at rest, and we are the loves that roam and can come home, again, we would be filled with all the fullness of God. It's almost too much to try to talk about. I think it's really worth looking at this in the context of some of his poems in the Diary of an Old Soul, where he talks about this. There's almost too many places to start to bring up here. But the idea, of course, that we can bring ourselves back to our source, that we can consciously return the love that God's love birthed in us, that we can bring it back, that our restlessness, right, we can find our place. We can know our place. We can know that we have a perfect place, that no one can take away from us, that individually we can be satisfied with who God has made us as unique and irreplaceable expressions of his nature that are needed to complete the picture, and that we ourselves, each one of us, and this of course is going back to the new name, just as I did in Cosmo's song, have something to offer to all our other brothers and sisters that no one else can, because there's a place in us that knows the Father in a way that no one else can. Encourage us to come back from the storm where we have not found a settled basis for our self-knowledge, and we've not found rest, and we're living in some kind of Kierkegaardian despair, to a place where we truly know our place and are truly at rest. And of course, this does harken back to that wonderful phrase from Augustine, that our hearts are not at rest until they come to rest in you. But also, of course, to the Dantean vision, Dantesque vision, especially of the end of the Purgatorio and the Paradiso that MacDonald loved so much and used very intentionally in Heather and Snow. If you remember that culminating scene in the coronation where Kirsty crowns finally Francie with her own hand, saying, "Now you're a man, because you've started to do what's right, not to please me, but because it's right." MacDonald says that Kirsty's not aware that she's exactly mirroring the scene at the end of the Purgatorio where Dante crowns the pilgrim. And of course, Kirsty is the Beatrice figure, who's been Francie's ideal, but he hasn't understood. And now, through his pilgrimage through hell and purgatory, he now has finally come back to the place where he can learn who she is, and where she can now reveal herself to him and be his. And again, not because she needs him to complete her, but because she has wanted from the beginning to give herself to him. It's just that she couldn't do that without it being harmful to him, right? Until he got free from his need for her and started to find the source of his own life and the power of his own existence in the ability to do right. And then, of course, the story comes to a successful conclusion, and we have this to sum up the whole novel. Well, there's so much that we could say. There's so much more that we could say here, and I know that we've drawn out only a few of hundreds of connections that we could make to the sermons and to other novels and to the Diary of an Old Soul and other poetical works. But perhaps you can do that better than me, and so perhaps I'd better end here and let you start thinking about your own connections. And I know that here I've probably babbled a bit, trying to express what can't be expressed. I'm going to close with this short passage that I can quote from Life. There's nothing for man worthy to be called life but the life eternal, God's life, that is, after his degree, shared by the man made to be eternal also. For he is in the image of God, intended to partake of the life of the Most High, to be alive as he is alive. Of this life the outcome and the light is righteousness, love, grace, truth. But the life itself is a thing that will not be defined, even as God will not be defined. It is a power, the formless cause of form. It has no limits whereby to be defined. It shows itself to the soul that's hungering and thirsting after righteousness, but that soul cannot show it to another, save in the shining of its own light. And that, of course, is the problem of this song, right? And of any attempts in general to do this, right? That we can rhapsodize on what love is, but we can't show it to any other person. We can't even show it to ourselves, except by learning to put ourselves in a position where we can be that daisy that finally comes out of the ground and opens up, and there's the sun, and now the eyes of our love are open, and we can finally see it and finally appreciate it. Kind of like how Nycteris in Photogena Nycteris, right? She thinks the moon is the sun at first, and then she comes to realize that there is a light as much greater than the moon as the moon is greater than the lamp in her prison. So I know that no amount of words, right, can convince a single heart that this is not just words, that this is a monumental insight into the nature of reality and the connected nature of reality and what nature really is and our part in it and our part with the Creator. But if you've already experienced that a little bit, perhaps it can be a little bit of a refreshing and a little bit of a reminder this Sunday afternoon. Thanks, and thank you for joining me on this little tour of Love is Home, Kirsty's song. Thank you again.